Hello and welcome back to the channel on our continuing voyage to become better guitar players. My name's Mark, and in this lesson we're going to look at building a practice routine. So I recently asked my Patreon supporters what they wanted me to cover, and this was the #1 topic that they asked for. So for today's lesson, I'm thinking back to when I was a slightly younger man. I was in my early 20s and I was a good beginner, but I wanted to make that step up to intermediate. I could fumble around a few chords and I could play a few bits and pieces of songs, but I wanted to make that step up to intermediate where I could actually join a band and start going out and playing real gigs. So I had very clear goals in mind of what I wanted to be able to do. I wanted to be able to play up and down the neck and not get lost anywhere. I wanted to be able to play songs and jam along to songs and play with the band, stay in time, stay in tune. I kind of knew what that sounded like and what that looked like in my mind. I wanted to be able to improvise. I knew I wanted to join a blues band and I wanted to be able to improvise my own solos. And I wanted good technique. I didn't want to sound like I was fumbling around not knowing what I'm doing. I wanted to play with confidence and play notes really strong. So I devised this practice routine for myself. What I did was I divided things up into 3 categories. The first one is I divided my time, really, I should say, into 3 categories. The first thing was looking at technique. The second one was learning songs. And the third one was then putting it all together and being able to apply that in a real life playing situation. Okay, so those are my 3 things. I worked out how much time I had to practice and how often I would practice, and I devised this practice routine where I broke things into these 3 sections. When it came to technique, I knew that I wanted to work on bending. I knew I needed to work on bending to pitch, getting up to the right pitch, being able to hold it, being able to shake it, doing, all these kind of things. I knew I needed to work out some exercises where I was bending. And I knew that I needed all of those to sound really good and really strong. And I needed to do them kind of all over the neck and be able to do that and always bend to pitch wherever I was. So I worked out some bending exercises for myself where I just practice it. I maybe just practice bending and holding and shaking and those type of things. And I just practice that every day. Also looking at scales and box positions and being able to play in the 5 different box positions, as I've taught on this channel many times, being able to drill those scales, always knowing wherever I am, in whichever box position, knowing exactly which note is the root note. So I always had an anchor point to come back to. One thing that I really drilled quite heavily for a period of time was my rhythm guitar playing. I knew that playing in a band, playing a live show, maybe for 2 hours, would mean being able to play rhythm guitar for probably 90% of that time. You play the odd solo and it might last 30 seconds, a minute, maybe 2 minutes if you're really lucky, but most of the rest of the time, for the whole song, you're chugging away playing rhythm guitar. And actually, let's imagine playing blues in A. If we're just doing this, and we're doing that type of blues shuffle rhythm playing, a couple of things. Firstly, it's going to get really boring really quickly if we're doing that for each song 5 minutes at a time. We're going to get bored, and if we get bored, the audience is going to get bored. So therefore, I needed to work out on my rhythm playing other things that would kind of augment that, things that I could drop in, other chord voicings and things I could use. But also, if you are playing that, or let's imagine we're playing in G and we're doing this kind of fingering here. Okay, now we all play that. We all play songs in G where it's got that shuffle beat. You do that for a bunch of songs for 2 hours a night and your hands are really going to hurt. In fact, you're going to struggle to do that for any length of time. When I first started playing, I struggled to do that for more than maybe 2 or 3 times around a 12 bar. I certainly couldn't play a whole song like that. So actually building up stamina as well by practicing, can I do that for a decent length of time? But also, if I want to stop doing that, what other rhythm things that can I do that would be interesting, that would go with the same beat, but would also allow me to kind of rest my hands. Because if you're doing this kind of shape, that's putting a lot of stress down here. So you want some other things. I've often talked about how on this channel, how I like kind of grabbing the guitar like a baseball bat. So I'll do this kind of thing as well. So I could alternate between doing this So I had other options. So first of all, building up the stamina, you know, how long can you do that for? But also having some other options so that you're giving your hand a rest by going to some other things as well. But also about, can you do that consistently? Can you do it in time? So I would literally spend, 5 minutes playing just a very simple rhythm guitar, or having a click going, having a drum beat or something, and making sure I can stay in time and stay with it, not wander off. That is a skill in itself. So as I say, rhythm guitar, it's the least glamorous part of guitar playing, but it's the thing we do most often. So I was making sure that I could really keep that rhythm guitar playing really solid, expanded my knowledge of chords. I've done a lesson on this channel before where I show you all the chords I ever use in a blues. And I only show them in E and A, so you can then transpose them into other keys as well. But I deliberately learned loads of different variations of these dominant chords so that I could give myself some variation and keep things interesting on my rhythm playing. So I really worked on that as well. Other things were like exercises and sequences, so things like going down in threes. Doing that kind of thing, and I would drill that, up, getting faster as well. So yes, sequences and those type of things as well. What I did was I worked out all the techniques that I wanted to learn that would help me as a blues player. Bending, hammer-ons and pull-offs, sliding notes, vibrato. Vibrato is a big thing to work on. There was other techniques like tapping and whammy bar techniques and things that I'm really interested in and sounded really cool, but I realized that wasn't for me. That wasn't going to benefit me as a blues player, so I didn't basically bother practicing those things. Focused on those things that would help me achieve my goal, which in that case was being able to play in a band. Okay, so the next thing then was learning songs, or not necessarily songs, but pieces of music. So the one that really helped me was actually this, and yes, I still own a whole bunch of these. This is Guitar Techniques from April 95, and at that time, and it probably still does, but I don't buy the magazine anymore, but at that time they had a blues column, and every month there would be an example solo. It wouldn't be too tricky. Jeff Whitehorn did it when I was learning, and every month there'd be a solo and I would learn it. And I'd spend the majority of my practice time learning to play that solo, getting those licks under my fingers. Now, I also learned kind of Beatles songs and Clapton blues, some Buddy Guy at one point, those kind of things. But learning actual songs as well, and learning, example pieces of music. And that idea of learning by example, that is why I run my channel the way I do now. Most of my lessons are, here's an example solo that's going to teach you a particular idea or a bunch of licks. Go and learn it, because that's how I learned it from Guitar Techniques magazine. Each month, spending the time getting that under my fingers, and then eventually being able to play it along with the backing track as well, and making sure I could do that. Because remember, my goal was to be able to play in a band, so it wasn't just good enough to get these licks under my fingers. I needed to be able to play them in context in a band. Okay, and then the third thing I mentioned was putting it all together. I would put some time aside now and again to just jam and just enjoy playing. But whatever it was I was working on up to that point, I would try and drop it in. So if I was working on bending, if I was doing those kind of bending exercises I mentioned before, if I was doing that and I'd been drilling that and getting that really good and sounding strong, then when it came to improvising, I would try to drop in as many bends as I can and think, I can do it in an exercise. Can I do it in a real life context? Can I put it into a solo? Can I put it into an improvisation? So when it came to these three areas, working on different techniques, learning songs, and then actually putting it together and jamming, should really say that what I did was I spent most of the time on the learning songs and learning stuff from guitar techniques, and a little bit of time on the drilling, the exercises on the technique, and would only do the putting it together, practicing and jamming probably once or twice a week. The rest of the time, if I had a 30-minute window every day, I'd spend 5 to 10 minutes on the technique, and then the rest of the time learning the piece, learning the next lick, etc. And then at the end of the week, maybe at the weekend or something, start to put it all together and jam out, put a backing track on, and see if you can actually apply that in context. So it wasn't just a strict, I'll do 10 minutes of this, 10 minutes of that, and 10 minutes of the other thing. Okay, so a couple of key tips if you're building your own practice routine. First of all, we need to be organized. So exactly as I said, work out pen and paper. What I did was work out, these are the techniques I want to learn. These are the exercises that are going to get me there. Okay, so I was organized. I set myself goals and I knew exactly what that goal was and what that looked like when I achieved it. One thing that was really key for me is I didn't get distracted. I would learn a piece like the guitar techniques exercise, the guitar techniques solo, and I would get it down so I could play it all the way through, and I could play it along with the backing track. I wouldn't start it and then give up halfway through and go on to something else and give up halfway through that. I've said this before on the channel, really important. More important really is just that when you learn something, see it all the way through so that it actually benefits your playing. You don't just flip from thing A to thing B to thing C, which is really tempting to do as a guitar player because there's so much cool stuff out there. Okay, and finally, the single best piece of advice I was ever given regarding practicing, and this was given to me by my friend Jeff Sheets, who's a well-known, very, very good guitar teacher. He said to me, don't practice until you can get it right. He said, you keep practicing until you don't get it wrong. And if you can do that, if you can do it so that you can nail it first time, every time, that means that when you get up there in the band situation, you are going to be able to do that and nail it first time, every time in context, rather than just, well, if I have 10 attempts, one of them will be right. That's not going to work in front of an audience. So that was the single best piece of advice I was ever given. So I hope some of this was useful. I hope you can go away, think about building your own practice routine. It doesn't matter how much time you've got to practice. Wherever you've got is wherever you've got. I've had times, there was one time, I had a week in my life where I got to practice 8 hours a day. My fingers were really sore at the end of that, but that's kind of rare. I've also had times in my life, like when my daughter was born, where I just didn't get any time to practice at all for probably the first year of her life, to be honest. And then there's other times where I usually get 20 minutes a day, an hour a day sometimes, wherever it is. But what I'm trying to do is put that to really good use. I was fortunate in my early 20s. I had quite a stable routine, and I could practice about 30 minutes a day, 30 to 40 minutes a day. And so this was my routine. Hope it was useful. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.